All right, Kiss Army, welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. Thank you for giving us your time today and letting us into your head. I hope we don't do any damage. We hope that you enjoy. Welcome to the KissFAQ Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Gill. Today I'm flying solo just to introduce an interview that I conducted in July 2017 with the now late Phil Ashley. Paul Stanley posted earlier today, Sunday, July the 12th, 2020, that Phil had passed away, and obviously he was very touched by that taking place. As am I, because Phil was a fantastic interview back when I was doing the Danger Zone project, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Crazy Nights album. But in the interview, Phil touched on a lot of his work with other bands, with him, well, I guess it's just best for you to listen to the interview and to hear some of Phil's stories from the mid-1980s, working with some of the biggest names in rock and roll. Rest in peace, Phil. Okay, well, thanks again for taking the time to talk with me. Certainly very much appreciate it. I'd like to get a little bit of background on you first, just so that we lead into, when we get into the Kiss stuff, people know where you're coming from in terms of keyboards, which you were working on the album. How did you get into music and specifically playing keyboards?
I studied as a child classical, and I got into bands. I was about 12 when I started playing in rock bands, and then so I started pretty young, and I always wanted to be a musician. And I didn't have a particular, I would just jump into styles, meaning, I loved classical, I loved rock, I loved pop. And then by the time I was 16, 17, I was playing jazz. So that gives you kind of an idea, kind of all over the place. But I just loved music.
That's a very broad spectrum of stuff, and I always love to hear that from folks, that you just don't get yourself pigeonholed into any one style. You can work around it. What would you call your first professional gig?
I technically always look at it as when I left college to go on tour with Rupert Holmes. He was the Pina Colada guy.
Yep.
And so I played keyboards for him, and that was like my first, quote, national, recording acts, say. So I always look at that as, the beginning of that kind of approach. Right before that, I'd been a college student, and I had a big band, a 20-piece big band in New York that was put together for me by New York studio musicians. And we would play all around town, and I was basically just would write everything. So even though it was with professionals and everything, I always look at that as just more of an experience. But I went from that straight into Rupert's band.
Did you decide early on that you liked session work and the variety of working with different acts rather than being in a single band type situation?
It took me a while. I was with a band called the Uptown Horn Band. They were a horn section. They played with a lot of acts, and they had a deal on EMI. And so I joined the band right before we went to England to record the album. I recorded the album. And through some corporate stuff, a bunch of acts got dropped. They were one of them. And I looked at it and just said, this isn't really my thing. I love the variety. I like walking in every day and not knowing what I'm doing. So it became more of like, it really fit for me to be more of a studio musician than, let's say, in one band playing the same stuff, over and over again. I was studying it. And at 10 or 11, my teacher said I had to make a decision between performance and composition. And I chose composition. I like difference.
Right.
So it's a personality thing. It's not really about, what I think is best, or it's just the nature of my personality.
It certainly seems to have served you well. Mid-'80s, so I'm going into 1986-87 here. You're working with, you're doing a lot of session work with Natasha's brother, Joy Winter, Jill Jones, Sweet Sensation. You record with Lou Gramm doing his first solo album, Ready or Not. How did your interaction with Lou come about?
I actually, it's funny because I was playing with my big band at the Ritz, and the drummer in the big band was Lou Gramm's brother, Benny Graham. And on soundcheck, he said, let's go visit my brother. He's doing an album over Electric Lady, which was Foreigner 4. So we went over there, and I had not been in a recording studio like that ever. And I was kind of stunned. And Lou was very friendly, and, they were showing us around. So when it came time to do his solo record, I was highly recommended. And That was timing-wise, it was interesting because I finished Lou's solo record, and I was doing the video for Ready or Not, and that's when I was flying out to LA to work with Kiss. It was like the same time.
All right. That's amazing.
Lou's album was like a little before. Yes, it was a little before Crazy Nights. So, yeah, Lou's a great singer, and I really was happy to be on that record.
That's a really fun album as well. And you got to play some of the early solo dates that he did in support of it as well, didn't you?
Yes, that's correct. Well, actually, I had to leave Lou's band because I was also recording with Mick Jagger. And I was doing his second album. I was doing that while I was doing Crazy Nights. And so when Mick asked me to go on tour with him and Jeff Beck, Lou was very gracious and let me, I got someone else to do it. Actually, Gary Corbett, who was the one I had recommended for Kiss.
Right. I spoke with him on Friday, and I'm glad your stories match up. That always helps.
He's a good guy. But yeah, I was just so busy and so all over the place. It was amazing. I slept.
Yeah. Where were you recording with Mick for Primitive Cool? Was that in Barbados or in Holland?
I started in Barbados because they had someone else start the record, but then Mick remembered me. And so I went down to Barbados, recorded with him. And then actually right after I finished Crazy Nights, the keyboards in LA, I ran to New York to finish up with Mick. And I ended up, 2 tours with him.
I think you did a video with Mick for Throwaway.
Actually, that day I went out there to do it, I visited Kiss because they were doing their rehearsals for Crazy Nights. And Gary had just, started working with him. So, yeah, this is all happening at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I find so amazing, that you're having to juggle and pick and choose between, Lou Gramm, Mick Jagger, Kiss, which is absolutely amazing to have all that on your plate at one time. And I guess you're doing remixes with, who is it, John Luango for Aerosmith?
John Luango, yeah. When I was in town, I would work with John. He kept me pretty employed. But I was also working with Debbie Harry. So I was just flying from one studio to another. It was great. It was really enjoyable. I had an office at Electric Lady, so a lot of the acts started coming down Electric Lady to work with me it was easier. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Couldn't ask for more, right?
Absolutely not. So I've got a question about it's tied in with Aerosmith, all the remixes that were popular in the mid to late 80s of Dude Looks Like a Lady and Rag Doll. You were doing those with John. Was there any talk about doing any for Crazy Nights?
Not really. I don't think so. I introduced Paul and John later on. He did a remix of X and Sex.
Right, which you're on the credits for.
So that was the first time. Yeah, that was the first time I believe that John and Paul actually did something. But Crazy Nights, I don't remember that.
Okay, so there's no 12-minute version of Crazy Nights sitting out there that Kiss fans are going to worry about.
It could be, but I know nothing about it.
All right, so
I never heard of it.
Paul Stanley, how did you meet him for the first time? Because you're working with him doing demos, which eventually get recorded for Crazy Nights. How does Phil Ashley come into Paul Stanley's realm?
It's a funny story. I was sort of the staff synthesizer player or consultant over at Electric Lady. They were doing Asylum, the album before Crazy Nights, and Paul wanted to try keyboards on Tears Have Fallen. So the studio manager recommended me, Mary, and I went into the studio, and we started working on the tune. And Paul and I definitely could not figure out where we knew each other, but there was something, we knew each other, but we couldn't figure it out. And after about 20 minutes or 25 minutes, he figured it out. We actually grew up a few blocks away from each other, and we knew each other as kids, teenagers, and we played together, and we had both changed our names. So, and I didn't really know anything really about Kiss, so I didn't realize that, I knew him as Stan. So he had gone on to do that, and he didn't realize that I changed my name, and I had gone on to do these other things. So that's how I met Paul, or reacquainted myself with Paul, was on that situation. It was a real mind blower for both of us, two guys from Queens. So when he wanted to do Crazy Nights, he spoke to me about it, and he asked me if I would, get involved with him on the demo side, and I said, sure. So we did the demos. I did all the demos with him at Electric Lady. We would program the drums, bass. I'd play the keyboards. Paul would do the guitar. And then we'd go in the studio, do vocals, and so forth. And that's what was, used as the templates for the album when it was recorded out in LA.
And a lot of that stuff, that I think they released Time Traveler on their box set in 2001. Was that some of the material like Best Man for You, Don't Let Go, and When Two Hearts Collide? I think those are the big songs that kind of circulate out in collector circles.
Yeah. You see, I'm not familiar with, we did a lot of songs that didn't go on the record. 2 of those titles I remember, but again, titles may have changed too. So I do remember we did stuff that, did not come out, and, that's always part of every record. But the last one and the first one, I believe, I remember those.
When Two Hearts Collide and Time Traveler?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall working on Hide Your Heart at this stage? I think he did that in 87 and
yeah.
It got left off the album and then used the following year.
Absolutely. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, again, this is 30 years ago, but I believe that was recorded for another Kiss album after Crazy Nights.
It was.
It was recorded in L.A.
Yep.
It was. And I remember I sang some of the chorus with them besides the keyboards.
All right.
That was one of my vocal debut with those guys. So I remember Hide Your Heart.
Were any of the other Kiss guys around when Paul's doing these demos? Bruce, for instance.
Bruce came in, I believe, to do some solos. Eric came in to do some vocals, and that was about it, because it was New York, basically, where we were doing these. And these were only going to be sketches. They were never supposed to be, this is it. It was really for Paul to figure out. He was going in a slightly more pop direction, and he really wanted a very close handle on the arrangements. And that's what we were concentrating on, bass and drums and voicings and so forth. So, as I said, they were well done demos, but the idea was never, that they would be re-recorded with the band. So, guitar solos, I think Bruce did some, but I don't think that we finished them all. You know what I mean?
Right. They wouldn't have needed them at that point, really, to flesh out the overall idea. So
No, not at all. Not at all. It was really for Paul to really, Paul's a hard worker, and the idea was to maximize these tunes, make them the best they could be.
Was he talking about publishing at this time? Because I know it's reported in Billboard at the time that he was writing for Cher and looking for other artists. I think he did a song that went with Jeff Harris as well at this time. Paul Dean picks up one of his songs. Was he talking with you about what this material's for? Is he saying, hey, I think this is a good song for Cher, or, this is all for the next Kiss album, or this is just ideas I'm working on?
No, everything was pretty much for Kiss, except When Two Hearts Collide, I believe he did for Cher, because I remember recording that, and it was he kind of wrote it for her. But everything else was really just right, and what does this sound like, and trying things. So it was always basically, always for Kiss.
Were you helping him with the arrangements, making suggestions for, hey, Paul, try this, because you come from a different perspective? He's very much a guitar-oriented guy. He was writing on keyboards, he says, at this time, but he calls himself a kamikaze keyboardist who kind of just jumps in, and that's why you're there, I expect. Well,
again, Paul's not really a keyboard player, so he would hear things and understand the top note of voicings and things like that. So it was really, for me, that's an easy translation. I play guitar also. So this is what I do with people, is try to pull out from them what they're trying to attain, maximize what they're doing. So he had very definite ideas, and this idea was to flesh them out. So my background being playing on so many kind of pop records and things like that, obviously I would help him with those kind of things. It was a lot of fun. We had a gas. We used to work in my office and then run to his car and listen.
So how easy or difficult of a process was it with Paul? Because he's very particular. He has a very definite vision in his head of how things are going to sound. And if he's kind of describing to you and you're translating into, keyboard and sound what his thoughts are, how did that process go? Was it tough, or did you kind of click and know what he wanted easily?
Total click. We had similar music sources. Paul and I, as teenagers, had similar sources in the sense of we both loved Led Zeppelin and Cream and that kind of music. He had gone much more to the performance side, and I had gone much more to the other side. But we had a base understanding of where we were going with this stuff. So for me, it was a breeze working with Paul. I mean, I worked with Paul for a number of years on things that weren't KISS. So we even did one of the tours in the 90s. I think. No, it was in the 80s. Oh, I forget when. He wanted to do a classical piece for the opening, and he came to me, and I did all the instruments, using synths and samplers, and we had a guest, So, and that was a real stretch, I'm sure. That was an interesting experience for him, and it was a great experience for me. So he and I gelled when it came to working together. He did his homework. He did his work. He really, that's what I'm used to dealing with, people like that.
So when you're recording at Electric Lady, are you in the proper studio, or is this a side room and, a quick and dirty place? Because he was known in the 70s for, going into the full studio for his demos. Was he still doing that when he worked with you?
Oh, no. We started in my office because we do a lot of programming. The drums are programmed, the bass was programmed. And then once we needed to get, we needed to get it on tape, we would go in the full studio. Dave Whitman, who engineered a lot of records for KISS, he was the engineer for most of this.
What sort of equipment did you have in your office for tracking and recording?
It really wasn't for tracking and recording. It was really, I had banks of synthesizers. And so the idea was that I could program stuff in my office, but we would always hit tape. This was the 80s, and digital recording was still in its infancy, in terms of computer recording.
So what sort of tape's being used in the studio to capture these demos? Is it 4, 8-track, or,
Oh, no, it's full 24, maybe 48, probably 24, if I remember correctly. No, we're using studios, Electric Lady was a state-of-the-art studio at that time, and we were using the facility as if we were recording, final records, whatever you want to call it.
So when it comes time for them to do the full album, will you always plan to be a participant in those sessions, or did you get a call later on saying, hey, Phil, can you come out to California and do the sessions with Ron Nevison?
No, Paul was very adamant from the beginning. He wanted me on the record, and Ron came to New York while we were doing demos, and he was thrilled that we were doing so much pre-production. He said, you guys are doing my job for me. And so I was new to Ron, I know, but, again, I went out there. I ended up working with Ron on an album after that. So, it was always going to be, I think, from my perspective, I just had to figure out the schedule. That was always the hard part.
It sounds in 1987, 88, you didn't have much time to take any time to do anything other than fill all this stuff in at the same, very clogged schedule, wasn't it?
It was so crowded that I remember that I was doing the video with Lou, and the director wanted another take, and I was like, shit, I'm going to miss my flight to LA to start with KISS in the morning. I remember that. So, yeah, it was what it was, While I was doing Crazy Nights, Nick was calling me, and we were discussing what we're going to do once I got back to New York. So that was my life, and it was great, and I loved it. And KISS were part of that. They were one of the acts that I was working with.
Do you remember which studio you were at in California? Was it Can-Am, or were you out at Rumbo?
Rumbo.
And were other band members around when you were doing it, or were you just coming in and putting the sweetening in, or were there listening back sessions with Gene and other guys to review it, or was it strictly Paul's in control here and with Ron?
Oh no, Gene was there the whole time. Bruce was there a lot. I think Eric was there. I don't remember offhand, but I remember Gene and because we went bowling. In fact, I'm pretty sure Eric was there when we went bowling. Anyhow, Gene, Gene, once I started working with KISS, actually I started working with Gene on a couple of his records that he was producing for his label. What were those bands called? Anyhow, so I knew Gene also, through this KISS connection to Paul. And no, Gene was definitely there every day.
When I talked with Kerry Corbett, he made a comment about Gene did not like keyboards. Was there any of that undertone that you got from him, that he wasn't totally thrilled to be doing an album that was a little bit more pop oriented with a strong keyboard essence to the music?
Absolutely. That was his opinion, and totally valid opinion. And yes, he expressed it very clearly, but I looked at it as, well, you guys make the decision. That's really not my role is to maximize what I bring. whether you like it or not. So that's for you guys to iron out. So Gene was always good about it. He used to do the skating thing, and you know, I don't know. I took it in good. You know, it's fun. Everyone has their opinion.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, Gary also said that when he did his sound check with the keyboards, Gene would start ice skating around the stage, fake ice skating, to let him know exactly how he felt.
He did that in the studio.
Okay.
No, I mean, you know, again, Gene is a character, and you know, that's part of who he is. It's you know, that's what it is. It's he's not the first one, and he's not the last one. And we all have opinions, and he expresses it particularly that way. But I've done so much work with Gene over the years that, you know, what can I say? It's just part of the thing. When they were producing Crown of Thorns, Paul and Gene, I did the keyboards on that, and they needed keyboards on that band. The focus of that band was guitar based, but definitely had to have keyboards. So, you know, that's Gene. Gene at least makes, you know, he's fun.
Yeah, different situations, he knows what's needed and goes with it.
Right.
In hindsight, how happy were you with your work? I mean, obviously, you probably didn't have any time to sit back and listen to it and think about it after you finished going out on tour with Mick and everything else that you were doing in the studio. But were you happy with the production when you did finally hear the finished product, how Ron had done, and how your contribution sounded?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I was actually surprised how loud the keyboards were. It is a hard rock band. Also, when I worked with Ron, we had kind of like did all the parts that had been done in pre-production, and he was happy. And then he said to me, look, what do you think? Do you have any ideas that have not been, you know, we have not looked at yet? And I said, sure. And he just basically said, okay, go for it. And that was a very good experience for me, because I love working with producers that give you that kind of openness. So the end of the keyboard recordings, really, he gave me a free rein. There are parts on there that were not part of pre-production. And I had a gas loop on doing that stuff. So for me, it was a very positive experience. And, you know, I'm looking for different things than, let's say, other people may look for. I'm just looking that the whole product is good. Do you understand what I'm saying? If I do great keyboards and the drums sound like shit, it's not going to work. So I was just happy, everything. I like Ron's production. So I was a fan of his stuff with Heart and so forth. So it was very positive.
And then, of course, two of the three singles were very keyboard-oriented, Reason to Live and Turn on the Night, both heavy with the keyboard influences. When it comes to Kiss touring, were you never considered whatsoever? Because
I was too busy. And at the same token, I would be playing off stage. So if your choice is between playing with Lou Gramm or Mick Jagger on stage and Kiss behind stage, I don't think that's really a relevant choice. You know, Paul always knew that I was doing all these things, and I really wasn't that into touring. I was really a studio guy. So, you know, when there came time to get a keyboard player, Paul called me and he said, "Can you recommend somebody?" So it was never for me to be in that role.
So you knew Gary from around Electric Lady or the New York scene and recommended him to Paul?
Yeah, because what happened is when I made the move from Lou to Mick's band, I had Gary take over. And Gary was great because he came to rehearsals, he understood the program, and he slid right into the Lou Gramm gig, no sweat. And that really showed me that he could do this. So when it came time for this one, to me it was a no-brainer. And I knew Gary would love the gig. So it all worked out for everybody. Gary was very professional. And that's what I know they needed. They needed somebody that they didn't have to think about, that we just do the gig, you know, learn the parts, and so forth. So Gary was the perfect guy. Was he the only person you recommended? Yes. Or did you give them a list? No, I said, try Gary first. We'll get back to it. But I just said, I think he's the right guy. He'd done it. He proved it. He proved it to me. You understand? Absolutely. And I was listening to some of the Lou Gramm stuff the other day, some live shows from Germany. Sounded good. Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits. The following year, they're back in New York. Paul is, and you work with them on the two new songs on there. Is that correct? Or did you just do the remixes with John later on for Let's Put the X? Now, we're talking... You're talking X with my, I'm sorry, Sex.
X and
Put the X in sex.
yeah, X and Sex.
Is that one of the songs?
X and Sex and Rock Hard.
Okay. I don't really remember Rock Hard, but then again, I could have worked on it. I remember Sex and X because I went to Paul's apartment, and that's where we started programming it. And he was working with Desmond Child.
That's right.
Who he tended to work with. I met Desmond back in when it was Crazy Nights. Oh, no, even Asylum, Desmond. So we started in his apartment, and then we moved over to Right Track to record it with Kiss. So I did the horns. I did quite a bit on that particular single. And it was, I guess that was it. I get a little confused because then there was another record. Oh, no, the one with the pyramid.
Yeah, Hot in the Shade with Hide Your Heart and Forever.
Right. That I flew out to California to do in a studio out there. That was, so that was a different time. So, but as far as the X in Sex, yes. Or Sex, yes. I did a lot of work on that.
Yeah, I think they were out at the Fortress in Hollywood when they were working on Hot in the Shade and Cherokee Studios. So
yes, I was the studio. That's I remember that well. Yes.
You've worked with a tremendous amount of acts. Where does Kiss kind of fall in your wheelhouse of experiences? Are they up there in the middle? It's always tough to ask someone to rate, a band that's been around for 45 years.
It's, you know what, Kiss, the only reason why Kiss is slightly different for me is that the relationship with Paul. He's the only person that I knew as a teenager that we ended up working together so much later on. And that always, it was a different bond, if you know what I mean. There was a certain friendship there. Like when he got his first marriage, I was one of his groomsmen. I did string arrangement that they walked down the thing for. I think it was forever, actually. So for me, Kiss was really this relationship with Paul. Paul would come to my shows. I was a Joe Satriani in the 90s. He would like to see me play with Joe. So it's a little different. I always look at different artists I work with as I'm there to maximize what they do. And with Kiss and Paul, I really felt I was able to accomplish that. So that's a sign of success for me as far as where I stack all these things. It's hard for me. I don't really say, oh, this is going to be a hit and this is not going to be a hit. I just do the best I can. And I think when you work with lots of artists, you don't really compare them. They're all unique. So I learn different things from different people. Lou was so different than Mick. Mick was so different than Tina Turner. I mean, Cher, totally different. Michael Bolton, totally different. Satriani, totally different. So everyone's different. And for me, the exciting thing is bringing to that different things. The work I did with, let's say, Joe Satriani is very different from the work I did with, let's say, Cher.
Absolutely.
So that's how I look at it. Paul, it was less about, I didn't know anything about Kiss. And when they did Asylum, and I played a little bit of this keyboards on that song, but he asked me to come out to help them with the show. I had programmed Eric's Syndromes for his solo, and also then eventually I did some opening music. But anyhow, they flew me out, and they were doing rehearsal, and Paul came up to me and he said, "You've never seen us, right?" And I said, "No." And, so he kind of introduced me to Kiss. So, it's a little different. There was a little more of a friendship thing there. And I admit that.
One of the things I do like asking, especially people who knew Paul before, was there anything about him that when you knew him in his youth that you would have said, I'm not surprised he actually made it as a musician? Because how many kids do, play around with music when they're young and not make it? Are you surprised or not surprised that Paul became the success that he has been for so many decades?
That's a hard question. I'm not good at that. The only thing I do remember about Paul is he had a vision. We used to talk, I remember at the bus stop, and he was looking at this thing of cartoons and rock, and he was much more image conscious than I was, and I thought it was really interesting. It was very like a vision he had, and this is way before Kiss. So I saw that he had a vision in terms of an understanding the sort of symbolism of music and so forth. So that I did recognize. He and I were both very into the London fashion of that time, all that kind of stuff. But as far as knowing that he would make it, I could make a huge box of all the people you think are going to make it, and they don't.
Right.
You know, I mean, growing up in that era in Queens, it's like everybody was in a band, and very few got past 30, you know. So there's a couple of my friends that are studio musicians, but Paul was the only one that really became, let's say, an icon or a star. So, you know, but did I see it? No, because I'm not good at those kind of visions.
Right.
That's not, you know, that it's just not my thing. It's not something I'm good at.
Were you actually in the same band as him, or just playing in bands around the same scene?
No, what happened was we had a mutual friend, and this guy said, "You got to meet my friend Paul." And I said, okay. So I walked over his house with this friend and went to his bedroom, and he had his guitar under his bed, I remember. He pulled it out, and we started jamming. And, you know, it was fun. I was playing guitar in those days. And we didn't continue in terms of playing together, but we always talked music. We were always running into each other, whether it was parties or at the bus stop, because he went to school in the city and I was always going in the city. And so we'd always see each other and stop and talk about music. This was our thing. But we weren't in bands because I was doing more of the Allman Brothers type stuff, and he was doing a bit more of the harder rock stuff. So we were kind of like in different worlds. But at the same token, always discussing music. We were definitely two addicts. We were two addicts. There was no two ways about it.
That is just one of those absolutely fascinating little pieces of minutia to learn that you don't go in expecting to find when you speak with someone. We're talking about Crazy Nights in 1987. To find out something about 1970 to 72 or whenever it was is just absolutely fascinating. And I do thank you for sharing that.
No, it was one of the jokes with us because I ended up, I remember again, he lived only a few blocks away. When I moved to Long Island, I moved to the same town as his parents. At one point, I actually lived across the street from them.
Oh gosh!
So it was just like so crazy, all these connections. But it just, you know, it was what it was.
Well, Phil, I've taken up nearly 40 minutes of your time, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to take my call. Well, thank you again so much, and you have a good afternoon.
Absolutely. Same to you.
Take care now. Bye. Thank you for spending time listening to the KissFAQ podcast today. All sales are final. There are no refunds. If you'd like, look us up on Facebook or come over to the KissFAQ message board and discuss the topic we've broadcast today. Don't forget to rate us on iTunes, Spreaker, or wherever you've listened to the show. We hope you'll join us again.